Canaan dog blocks a groom from holding his bride's hand. The truth that followed shattered the wedding. What happened at this wedding will shock you. A trained police dog saw something everyone else missed, and his actions saved a family from unimaginable danger. If you're listening from anywhere around the world, drop a comment and let us know where you're tuning in from. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more incredible true stories like this one. The story you're about to listen to began on what should have been the happiest day of Sarah Mitchell's life. She stood in front of her bedroom mirror, adjusting the delicate lace sleeves of her grandmother's wedding dress. The morning sun streamed through the windows of the old countryside manor, casting golden light across her face. Everything looked perfect, too perfect perhaps. "Mommy, you look like a princess," squealed her 5-year-old daughter Maya, bouncing on the bed in her tiny flower girl dress. The little girl's dark curls bounced with each jump, and her brown eyes sparkled with excitement. Sarah smiled, but something felt different today. A strange heaviness sat in her chest that she couldn't explain. She blamed it on wedding day nerves. After all, she was about to marry Marcus Reed, the man who had swept her off her feet 8 months ago. He was everything she thought she wanted: successful, charming, and seemingly devoted to both her and Maya. "Is Marcus already downstairs?" Sarah asked her sister Jenny, who was helping with the final touches on her veil. "Yes, he's been pacing around the garden for the past hour," Jenny laughed. "That man is more nervous than you are. He keeps checking his watch and asking if everything's ready." Sarah nodded, but that heavy feeling in her chest grew stronger. She pushed it aside. Today was supposed to be perfect. Outside, the countryside estate buzzed with activity. White chairs were arranged in perfect rows on the manicured lawn, with an arch of white roses and baby's breath at the altar. The September air was crisp but warm, exactly what Sarah had dreamed of for her wedding day. Guests were already beginning to arrive, dressed in their finest clothes, chattering excitedly about the beautiful setting. Marcus stood near the altar, adjusting his black tie for the 10th time. He looked handsome in his tailored suit, his dark hair perfectly styled, his confident smile charming everyone around him. The guests whispered about how lucky Sarah was to have found such a catch after her difficult divorce 3 years earlier. "She deserves this happiness," one guest murmured to another, especially after what she went through with Maya's father. But there was someone at the wedding who wasn't impressed by Marcus's charm. Rex, a retired German shepherd who had served 5 years with the local police force, sat quietly beside Sarah's father near the front row. The dog's alert brown eyes followed Marcus's every movement. His ears were perked forward, and his body remained tense despite the festive atmosphere around him. Sarah's father, Tom, had adopted Rex 2 years ago when the dog retired from active duty. The shepherd had been trained in protection work, drug detection, and most importantly, reading human behavior. Rex had an uncanny ability to sense danger and aggressive intentions in people. It was what made him such an exceptional police dog. "Easy, boy," Tom whispered, noticing Rex's rigid posture. "It's just a wedding, nothing to worry about." But Rex didn't relax. His training had taught him to trust his instincts, and every instinct was telling him that something was wrong with the groom. The ceremony was scheduled to begin at 3 o'clock. By 2:30, all the guests had taken their seats. The string quartet began playing soft music as the wedding party prepared to make their entrance. Sarah's bridesmaids, dressed in soft lavender, lined up behind the old oak doors of the manor house. Maya skipped ahead of them, practicing her flower girl walk. She scattered rose petals from her small white basket, giggling as they fluttered to the ground. The child's joy was infectious, and even the photographer couldn't help but smile as he captured her carefree moments. "She's going to steal the show," one of the bridesmaids commented. "Just like her mother did when she was little," Sarah's aunt replied, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. As the clock struck 3, the music changed to the traditional wedding march. The guests rose to their feet, turning to watch for the bride. Marcus took his position at the altar next to Pastor Williams, a kind elderly man who had known Sarah's family for decades. But as the music swelled, Rex's behavior became more pronounced. The dog stood up, his hackles beginning to rise slightly. Tom tried to calm him, but Rex's attention was fixed entirely on Marcus. Something about the groom's scent, his body language, or perhaps something deeper, was triggering the dog's protective instincts. The bridesmaids began their slow walk down the aisle, followed by Maya, who beamed as she scattered her petals. The guests awed at her cuteness, But Rex's eyes never left Marcus. The dog's breathing became more rapid, and his tail remained stiff and alert. Finally, the moment everyone had been waiting for arrived. Sarah appeared at the entrance, radiant in her grandmother's dress, her arms linked with her father's. The guests gasped at her beauty, and Marcus's face lit up with what appeared to be genuine joy. Tom began walking his daughter down the aisle, Rex following closely at his side. The dog's training had taught him to stay close to his handler at all times, but his instincts were screaming that something was terribly wrong. As they reached the halfway point down the aisle, Rex's behavior shifted dramatically. His ears flattened against his head, and a low, almost inaudible growl began rumbling in his chest. Tom felt the dog's tension through the leash and looked down in surprise. "What's wrong, boy?" he whispered, but Rex's eyes remained locked on Marcus. The processional continued, but several guests began to notice Rex's strange behavior. The dog's body language was unmistakable to anyone who knew German shepherds. He was in full alert mode, ready to protect his family from a perceived threat. Sarah and her father reached the altar, and Tom prepared to give his daughter away. But as he leaned forward to kiss Sarah's cheek and hand her over to Marcus, Rex suddenly stepped forward, positioning himself directly between Sarah and her groom. The movement was subtle at first. The dog simply moved closer to Sarah, his body creating a barrier between her and Marcus. Some guests chuckled, thinking it was cute that the family dog was being protective of the bride. Pastor William smiled warmly and began the ceremony. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to witness the union of Sarah and Marcus in holy matrimony." But Rex wasn't finished. As Marcus reached out to take Sarah's hand, the traditional moment when the groom takes the bride's hands in his own, Rex moved again. This time, he stepped directly in front of Sarah, his body blocking Marcus's access to her completely. The guests' chuckles became nervous laughter. Sarah looked down at Rex in confusion, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment. "Rex, what are you doing?" she whispered, trying to gently push the dog aside. But Rex wouldn't budge. His training had taught him never to abandon his post when he sensed danger, and every fiber of his being was telling him that Marcus posed a threat to Sarah and Maya. Marcus's smile faltered for the first time. "Can someone please move the dog?" he said, his voice carrying a slight edge that made Rex's growl become more audible. "I'm so sorry," Sarah apologized to the guests, her face burning with embarrassment. "Rex, come here. It's okay." She reached down to guide the dog away, but as she did, Marcus stepped forward more aggressively, his hand reaching out to grab Sarah's arm and pull her away from Rex. That's when Rex's protective instincts took over completely. The dog barked once, loud and commanding, causing several guests to jump in their seats. His bark echoed across the peaceful countryside setting, shattering the romantic atmosphere like glass. The silence that followed was deafening. Rex stood firm, his eyes never leaving Marcus, his body language screaming danger to anyone who understood canine behavior. But most of the guests didn't understand. They saw a misbehaving dog disrupting a wedding, not a trained police dog responding to a legitimate threat. Marcus's face darkened with anger. "This is ridiculous," he snapped, his charming facade beginning to crack. "Someone get this dog away from my bride right now." But Rex had spent 5 years learning to read people, and Marcus's aggressive tone only confirmed what the dog already knew. This man was dangerous, and Rex would not allow him to get close to Sarah or Maya. The wedding guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. What had started as a beautiful ceremony was turning into something else entirely. Some people began whispering among themselves, wondering what was wrong with the dog. Others, particularly those who knew Rex's background as a police dog, began to wonder if there was something more serious happening. Maya, who had been standing near the altar with her basket of flowers, suddenly ran toward her mother. "Mommy," she cried, wrapping her small arms around Sarah's legs. The child's movement seemed to trigger something else in Rex. His protective instincts extended to Maya as well, and he positioned himself so that both Sarah and her daughter were behind him, with Marcus blocked from reaching either of them. "This is insane," Marcus said, his voice rising. "It's just a dog." But Rex wasn't just any dog. He was a trained professional who had spent years learning to identify threats that humans couldn't see. And everything about Marcus Reed was setting off alarm bells in the dog's highly trained mind. The tension in the air was palpable. Pastor Williams looked uncertain about how to proceed. The wedding guests murmured anxiously. Sarah stood frozen, torn between embarrassment at her dog's behavior and a growing unease about Marcus's reaction. Tom, who had been watching the scene unfold, finally stepped forward. As Rex's handler, and a man who had worked with police dogs for years, he recognized the signs. Rex wasn't misbehaving, he was doing his job. "Sarah," Tom said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of years of experience with police work, "maybe we should listen to what Rex is trying to tell us." Those words would change everything, because sometimes the most important warnings come from those who can't speak, but who see things that love-blinded humans miss entirely. The afternoon sun continued to shine down on the countryside estate, but the shadow of doubt had fallen across what should have been the happiest day of Sarah Mitchell's life. And Rex, the retired police dog who had served his community faithfully for 5 years, wasn't done protecting his family yet. In fact, he was just getting started. The wedding guests sat in stunned silence as the standoff continued. Rex remained planted firmly between Sarah and Marcus, his powerful body creating an unmistakable barrier. The dog's ears were pinned back, and his brown eyes held an intensity that made several guests shift uncomfortably in their seats. Pastor Williams cleared his throat nervously. "Perhaps we could take a brief moment to—" "No," Marcus interrupted sharply, his charming mask slipping further. "We're not stopping this ceremony because of a badly trained dog." His words hit the wrong note with Tom, who had spent decades working with police dogs. "Rex isn't badly trained," Tom said firmly. "He's one of the best police dogs this county ever had. If he's acting like this, there's a reason." Marcus laughed, but it came out forced and hollow. "You're seriously going to let a dog ruin our wedding day?" Sarah looked between her father and her groom, confusion and embarrassment warring on her face. "Maybe we should just move Rex back to his seat and—" But as she reached toward the dog again, Rex did something that made everyone's blood run cold. He didn't growl or bark this time. Instead, he went completely still, his body language shifting into what police officers called threat assessment mode. His head lowered slightly, his muscles coiled like a spring ready to release. Jenny, Sarah's sister, gasped from her position with the bridesmaids. "I've never seen Rex act like this before." "That's because he's never encountered a situation like this before," Tom muttered, his own police instincts beginning to kick in as he watched his dog's behavior. Marcus's face was growing redder by the minute. "This is absolutely ridiculous. Sarah, call off your dog right now, or I'm walking out of here." The threat hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Several guests gasped at the ultimatum. What kind of groom threatened to abandon his bride at the altar over a dog's behavior? Maya, still clinging to her mother's dress, looked up with tears in her brown eyes. "Mommy, why is Marcus being mean to Rex?" The child's innocent question cut through the tension like a knife. Sarah's heart clenched as she saw the fear in her daughter's face. Maya had always been shy around Marcus, but Sarah had attributed it to the normal adjustment period of accepting a new father figure. Now, seeing her daughter's reaction, doubt began creeping into Sarah's mind like poison. "He's not being mean, sweetheart," Sarah said softly, though her voice lacked conviction. "He's just confused." But Rex wasn't confused at all. His training had taught him to read micro-expressions, body language, and chemical signals that humans couldn't detect. Right now, every signal coming from Marcus Reed screamed danger. Dr. Elizabeth Harper, a family friend who happened to be a veterinary behaviorist, stood up from her seat in the third row. "Sarah, may I say something?" Sarah nodded gratefully, hoping for some expert insight that might resolve the situation. "I've studied canine behavior for over 20 years, Dr. Harper said, her voice carrying across the silent gathering. "What Rex is displaying right now isn't aggression or misbehavior. It's protective warning behavior. Dogs, especially trained police dogs, can detect physiological changes in humans that we can't perceive. Elevated stress hormones, aggressive pheromones, changes in heart rate, and breathing patterns." Marcus scoffed. "Are you seriously suggesting that a dog knows something we don't?" "I'm suggesting that Rex is trying to communicate something important," Dr. Harper replied calmly. "In my professional opinion, his behavior indicates he perceives a genuine threat to Sarah and Maya." The words sent a chill through the gathered wedding guests. This wasn't just a misbehaving pet anymore. This was a trained professional animal raising an alarm. Marcus's composure finally cracked completely. "This is insane. You're all insane. It's our wedding day, and you're letting a dog make decisions for us?" His outburst was loud enough that several guests in the back rows leaned forward to hear better. Sarah flinched at his tone, and Maya pressed closer to her mother's legs. Marcus, please, Sarah said quietly. Maybe if we just take a moment to... Take a moment for what? Marcus snapped, his voice rising dangerously. To let your family's pet psychoanalyze me? To ruin what should be the happiest day of our lives? But as the words left his mouth, something else happened that made everyone freeze. Maya, who had been quietly crying, suddenly spoke up in a small, trembling voice. He yells at me sometimes, Mommy. The words were barely above a whisper, but in the stunned silence of the countryside estate, everyone heard them clearly. Sarah's world tilted on its axis. What did you say, baby? Maya looked up at her mother with tear-filled eyes. Yesterday, when you were taking a shower, Marcus yelled at me. He said I was being too loud and that I needed to learn to be quiet because grown-ups were more important than little kids. The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. She stared down at her daughter, then at Marcus, whose face had gone pale. She's making it up, Marcus said quickly, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. Kids say things all the time. She probably just... No, I'm not, Maya protested, her small voice gaining strength. And Rex was there. Rex came and sat next to me when you were being mean. He made me feel safe. Every eye turned to Rex, who remained motionless in his protective stance. The dog's behavior suddenly made perfect sense. He hadn't just been protecting Sarah from a potential threat. He had been protecting Maya from someone who had already demonstrated aggressive behavior toward her. Sarah felt sick to her stomach. How had she missed this? How had she been so blind to what was happening in her own home? Jenny stepped forward from the bridesmaids' line. Sarah, remember last week when you asked me why Maya seemed so quiet whenever Marcus was around? Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. She did remember. Maya, who was usually chatty and bubbly, became subdued whenever Marcus entered the room. Sarah had mentioned it to Jenny, but they had both dismissed it as normal adjustment behavior. Oh my God, Sarah whispered, the pieces finally clicking together in her mind. Marcus could see the tide turning against him, and desperation crept into his voice. Sarah, you're not going to let them turn you against me, are you? We love each other. We're supposed to be getting married right now. But Sarah wasn't looking at Marcus anymore. She was looking at her daughter, really looking at her, and seeing signs she had missed before. The way Maya's shoulders tensed when Marcus entered a room. The way she always found excuses to stay close to Sarah when Marcus was around. The way she had started having nightmares in the past few weeks. Maya, Sarah said gently, kneeling down to her daughter's level. Has Marcus ever hurt you? Maya shook her head quickly. No, Mommy, but he scares me sometimes. He gets this look in his eyes when he's angry, like Daddy used to get. The reference to Maya's biological father sent ice through Sarah's veins. Her ex-husband had been emotionally abusive, which was why she had divorced him 3 years earlier. The idea that she might be about to marry another man with similar tendencies made her feel physically ill. Tom, who had been watching the entire exchange while keeping one eye on Rex, finally spoke up. Sarah, I think we need to step back and really think about what's happening here. Marcus whirled around to face Tom. This is between Sarah and me. This is our wedding, and I'm not going to let you people ruin it with your paranoid fantasies. But even as he spoke, his body language was becoming more aggressive. His hands were clenched into fists, his jaw was tight, and his breathing had become rapid and shallow. Rex picked up on every signal, his own tension increasing in response. Dr. Harper observed interaction with professional interest. Sarah, I want you to notice something. Watch Marcus's posture, breathing. Now look at Rex's response. Everyone turned to observe both man and dog. As Marcus's agitation increased, Rex's alertness heightened correspondingly. The dog was reacting to physiological cues that the humans couldn't consciously perceive. Dogs don't lie, Dr. Harper said quietly. They can't be manipulated by charm or convinced to ignore their instincts. Rex is reading signals that we're just beginning to recognize consciously. Sarah stood up slowly, her grandmother's wedding dress rustling softly in the afternoon breeze. She looked at Marcus, really looked at him, and for the first time, she saw past the handsome facade to something darker underneath. Tell me the truth, Marcus, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Have you ever lost your temper with Maya? I would never hurt her, Marcus said, but his eyes wouldn't meet Sarah's. That's not what I asked, Sarah pressed. Have you ever yelled at her, made her feel scared or unwelcome in our home? The pause that followed was answer enough. Marcus opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again, clearly struggling to find words that would make this situation go away. Meanwhile, Rex never moved from his protective position. The dog's dedication to his perceived duty was absolute. He had identified a threat to his family, and he would not abandon his post until that threat was neutralized or removed. Pastor Williams, who had been conducting weddings for over 30 years, had never encountered a situation like this. He looked around at the assembled guests, many of whom were now whispering among themselves, their faces showing concern rather than celebration. Perhaps, the pastor said carefully, this would be a good time to take a brief recess. Let everyone collect their thoughts and— No, Sarah said firmly, surprising everyone, including herself. No recess. I want answers right now. She turned to face Marcus fully, and for the first time since she had known him, she saw fear in his eyes. Not fear of losing her, but fear of being exposed. Marcus, I need you to be completely honest with me right now. In front of all these people, in front of God, tell me, have you ever made my daughter feel unsafe in any way? The question hung in the air like a sword over Marcus's head. The countryside estate was so quiet that everyone could hear the distant sound of birds singing in the oak trees. Marcus looked around at the assembled guests, then at Sarah, then down at Maya, who was still pressed close to her mother's side. When his eyes finally landed on Rex, something shifted in his expression. The dog's unwavering stare seemed to strip away his last pretense. She's too sensitive, he said finally, his voice defensive. I may have raised my voice a few times, but that's normal. Kids need to learn boundaries. The admission sent shockwaves through the wedding party. Several guests gasped audibly, and Jenny put her hand over her heart. Raised your voice how? Sarah pressed. Her mother's instincts fully awakened now. Marcus's facade was crumbling completely. Look, I never laid a hand on her, okay? But she needed to understand that things were going to be different once we were married. She couldn't just run wild and do whatever she wanted anymore. Sarah felt like she had been punched in the stomach. Different how? More structured, more disciplined. You're too easy on her, Sarah. She needs a firm hand, or she's going to grow up thinking the world revolves around her. The words revealed everything. Marcus wasn't just planning to marry Sarah. He was planning to take control of her household, including how she raised her daughter. Maya began crying harder, and Rex's protective instincts kicked into an even higher gear. The dog moved closer to the little girl, his body language making it clear that he would not allow Marcus to get near her. Tom stepped forward, his own parental instincts activated. I think that's enough, he said firmly. Sarah, I think you need to really consider what's happening here. But Sarah was already considering it. She looked at her daughter's tear-streaked face, at Rex's unwavering protective stance, at Marcus's angry and defensive posture, and finally at the faces of her wedding guests. Everyone was looking at her with concern, waiting to see what she would do. The fairy tale wedding she had planned was already over. The question now was whether she would have the courage to make the right choice for her and Maya's future. What Sarah did next would determine whether Rex's brave intervention had saved his family from years of hidden abuse, or whether love would once again blind her to the truth staring her in the face. The weight of the moment pressed down on Sarah like a heavy blanket. She stood there in her grandmother's wedding dress, surrounded by family and friends who had come to celebrate what they thought would be the happiest day of her life. Instead, they were witnessing the unraveling of everything she thought she knew about the man she was about to marry. I need a moment, Sarah said quietly, her voice barely audible over the rustling of leaves in the oak trees. She looked down at Maya, who was still clinging to her dress, then at Rex, who hadn't moved an inch from his protective position. Sarah, we can work through this, Marcus said, desperation creeping into his voice. We don't need to make a big scene in front of everyone. Let's just finish the ceremony and talk about this later. But Sarah was no longer listening to Marcus. Instead, she was remembering things she had pushed aside, moments that had seemed insignificant at the time, but now painted a disturbing picture. 3 weeks ago, she had come home from grocery shopping to find Maya sitting quietly in her room, unusually subdued. When Sarah asked what was wrong, Maya had said she was tired, but there had been something in her daughter's eyes that Sarah couldn't identify. Marcus had been watching television in the living room, and when Sarah mentioned Maya's mood, he had simply shrugged and said kids were moody sometimes. 2 weeks ago, Maya had started asking if they could spend more time at Grandpa Tom's house. Sarah had thought it was sweet that Maya wanted to bond with her grandfather and Rex, but now she wondered if her daughter had been seeking refuge. Last week, Maya had asked out of nowhere if they really had to get married. Can't it just be you and me forever, Mommy? She had said. Sarah had laughed it off as pre-wedding jitters affecting the whole family. But Maya's question took on a darker meaning now. Jenny stepped closer to her sister, her bridesmaid dress rustling softly. "Sarah, what are you thinking?" Sarah looked at Jenny, then at her father, then at Dr. Harper, who was watching the situation with the trained eye of someone who understood animal behavior better than most people understood human behavior. "I'm thinking," Sarah said slowly, "that I've been so desperate to give Maya a father that I ignored the signs that he might not be the right kind of father." Marcus's face flushed red. "That's not fair, Sarah. I've tried to build a relationship with Maya, but she's been resistant from day one. Some kids just take longer to adjust." "Resistant?" Sarah's voice sharpened. "She's 5 years old, Marcus. She shouldn't have to adjust to being yelled at or made to feel unwelcome in her own home." "I never made her feel unwelcome," Marcus protested, but his defensive tone suggested otherwise. Tom, who had been quietly observing while keeping one hand on Rex's collar, finally spoke up again. "Sarah, can I tell you something about Rex's training?" Sarah nodded, grateful for her father's calm presence in the chaos. "Police dogs are trained to identify threats long before they become dangerous," Tom explained. "They can detect changes in human behavior, stress hormones, aggressive tendencies. Rex has been around hundreds of people since he retired, and he's never acted like this with anyone." "Because he's never been around someone like me before," Marcus said bitterly. "I'm not a criminal. I'm a successful businessman who happens to believe in discipline and structure." "Discipline and structure are fine," Dr. Harper interjected from her seat. "But what Rex is responding to isn't discipline, it's intimidation. There's a significant difference in the physiological responses they produce." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "What do you mean?" Dr. Harper stood up, her professional demeanor making everyone pay attention. "When someone uses healthy discipline, their body language remains calm and controlled. When someone uses intimidation or emotional manipulation, they release different chemical signals. Their heart rate increases, their breathing changes, their muscle tension shifts. Rex is trained to recognize those patterns." "You're basing this entire theory on a dog's reaction?" Marcus asked incredulously. "I'm basing it on the reaction of a highly trained professional animal who has successfully identified threats for 5 years without a single false positive," Tom replied firmly. The conversation was interrupted by a small voice that cut through all the adult arguments like a knife through butter. "Mommy, I don't want Marcus to be my daddy anymore." Maya's words were clear and direct, spoken with the honest simplicity that only children possess. She looked up at Sarah with tears streaming down her cheeks, but with a determination that was startling in someone so young. Sarah knelt down again, bringing herself to Maya's eye level. "Why, sweetheart? Can you tell Mommy why you feel that way?" Maya glanced nervously at Marcus, then back at her mother. "He told me that when you got married, I would have to start being a good girl and stop being such a baby. He said that crying was for babies and that big girls who lived in his house couldn't cry anymore." The words hit Sarah like a series of physical blows. She remembered now that Maya had seemed to cry less in recent weeks, which Sarah had interpreted as her daughter maturing. The truth was much more sinister. "When did he tell you this?" Sarah asked gently. "Lots of times," Maya said in a small voice, "but especially yesterday when you were getting your hair done. He said that after today, everything would be different, and I would have to follow his rules or there would be consequences." "Consequences?" Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. Maya nodded solemnly. "He said that little girls who didn't listen might have to go live somewhere else where they could learn to behave better." The threat was clear, and it explained everything. Marcus had been systematically preparing to isolate Maya from her mother, using emotional manipulation and intimidation to ensure compliance. The realization made Sarah feel physically sick. She stood up slowly, her legs shaking with anger and adrenaline. When she looked at Marcus now, she saw him clearly for the first time. The charming smile was gone, replaced by a cold calculation that chilled her to the bone. "You threatened to send my daughter away," Sarah said, her voice deadly quiet. "I never threatened anything," Marcus replied quickly. "I was just trying to help her understand that actions have consequences. That's normal parenting." "Normal parenting?" Sarah's voice rose for the first time. "Threatening to send a 5-year-old away from her mother is normal parenting?" The wedding guests were now fully engaged in the drama unfolding before them. Several people had pulled out their phones, though whether to call for help or document the situation was unclear. Rex, who had remained stationary throughout the conversation, suddenly took a step forward. His movement was subtle but deliberate, and it effectively blocked Marcus from moving any closer to Sarah and Maya. Even now, Dr. Harper observed, watch how Rex responds to the elevation in Marcus's stress levels. Indeed, as Marcus became more agitated and defensive, Rex's body language became more pronounced. The dog's ears were fully flattened now, and his weight was shifted forward onto his front paws, ready to spring into action if necessary. Jenny, who had been listening to everything with growing horror, finally found her voice. "Sarah, you have to call this off. You can't marry someone who would threaten your child." "She's overreacting," Marcus said desperately. "Maya misunderstood what I said. I would never actually send her anywhere. I was just trying to motivate her to behave better." But his words rang hollow, and everyone could hear the lies beneath the surface. Sarah looked around at the faces of her family and friends, seeing concern and support rather than judgment. These people loved her and Maya, and they were all trying to protect them from making a terrible mistake. Pastor Williams, who had been silent for several minutes, finally cleared his throat. "Sarah, in my 30 years of conducting weddings, I've learned that when serious concerns arise during a ceremony, it's always better to address them fully rather than proceed with doubts." Sarah nodded, grateful for the pastor's wisdom. She looked down at Maya again, seeing her daughter's tear-streaked face, but also noticing a spark of hope in her brown eyes. Hope that maybe, finally, someone was listening to her. "Marcus," Sarah said, turning to face him fully, "I need you to understand something. Maya is not just my daughter. She's my priority, my responsibility, and my heart. Any man who wants to be part of our lives has to love her unconditionally and make her feel safe and valued." "I do love her," Marcus protested, but the words sounded rehearsed rather than genuine. "No," Sarah said firmly, "you love the idea of having a ready-made family. You love the convenience of not having to start from scratch, but you don't love Maya for who she is. You see her as an obstacle to overcome rather than a child to cherish." The truth of her words seemed to resonate with everyone present. Several guests nodded in agreement, and Tom placed a supportive hand on Sarah's shoulder. Marcus's mask finally slipped completely. "Fine," he said, his voice turning cold and hard. "You want to know the truth? Yes, I think Maya is spoiled. Yes, I think she needs more discipline than you're willing to give her. And yes, I think it would be better for everyone if she learned that the world doesn't revolve around her." The admission was like a bomb going off in the peaceful countryside setting. Several guests gasped audibly, and Jenny actually stepped backward in shock. But Marcus wasn't finished. "I've spent 8 months trying to build a relationship with a child who clearly resents me for taking her father's place. I've been patient and understanding, even when she was rude or defiant. All I've asked for in return is some basic respect and obedience." "She's 5 years old," Sarah exclaimed. "She doesn't owe you respect. You have to earn it by showing her love and kindness and patience." "I've been patient," Marcus shot back. "But patience has limits. I thought that once we were married, we could establish proper boundaries and expectations. I thought Maya would learn to accept me as her father figure." "By threatening her and making her feel unwelcome in her own home," Tom interjected, his voice heavy with disgust. Rex, responding to the increasing tension in the air, took another step forward. His protective instincts were now in full overdrive, and his body language made it clear that he considered Marcus a genuine threat to his family. Marcus noticed the dog's movement, and his expression darkened further. "That animal has been a problem from day one," he said. "I told Sarah months ago that Rex was too aggressive and unpredictable to have around a child, but she wouldn't listen." "Rex has never shown aggression toward anyone except you," Tom replied coldly. "Maybe you should ask yourself why that is." Dr. Harper stood up again, her professional curiosity overriding the social awkwardness of the situation. "Marcus, I'd like to conduct a simple experiment. Would you mind taking 3 steps toward Sarah and Maya?" "What kind of experiment?" Marcus asked, suspiciously. "I want to demonstrate something about Rex's behavior," Dr. Harper explained. "If you are genuinely not a threat, Rex should remain calm when you approach his family." Marcus hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the idea. "This is ridiculous. I'm not going to be tested by a dog." "Why not?" Sarah asked, her voice gaining strength. "If you have nothing to hide, if you're genuinely safe for Maya and me to be around, then Rex should have no problem with you coming closer. The challenge hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown down. Marcus looked around at the assembled wedding guests, all of whom were watching him with varying degrees of suspicion and concern. "Fine," he said finally, "but when nothing happens, I want apologies from all of you." He took one step towards Sarah and Maya. Rex's ears perked up slightly, but the dog remained in position. Marcus took a second step. This time, Rex's body tensed visibly, and a low rumble began in his chest. When Marcus moved to take the third step, Rex's response was immediate and unmistakable. The dog barked once, sharp and commanding, and moved directly into Marcus's path. His message was crystal clear: come no closer. The demonstration was more effective than any words could have been. Here was a trained professional animal, with years of experience reading human behavior, declaring that Marcus posed a threat to the people Rex was sworn to protect. Sarah felt the last of her doubts evaporate. Rex wasn't misbehaving or being overprotective. He was doing exactly what he had been trained to do: identify and neutralize threats to innocent people. She looked at Marcus, standing there in his expensive suit with anger and frustration written across his face, and realized that she had never really known him at all. The charming man who had swept her off her feet 8 months ago had been a carefully constructed facade, designed to win her trust and gain access to her family. The question now was what to do with this devastating revelation. They were standing at the altar, surrounded by family and friends, with a pastor waiting to perform a ceremony that clearly could not and should not continue. Sarah took a deep breath, knowing that her next words would change everything. But as she looked down at Maya's hopeful face and at Rex's unwavering protective stance, she realized that some choices were easier than they seemed. The moment of truth had arrived, and Sarah Mitchell was finally ready to choose her daughter's safety over her own romantic dreams. Comment below. What would you do if you were in Sarah's position? Would you trust the dog's instincts or give Marcus another chance? Sarah stood at the crossroads of her life, her grandmother's wedding dress suddenly feeling like a costume she was wearing in someone else's play. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the countryside estate, and the romantic setting that had seemed so perfect hours earlier now felt like a stage for a nightmare she was desperate to wake up from. "Marcus," she said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands, "I can't do this." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Marcus's face went through a series of emotions: shock, disbelief, anger, and finally, something that looked dangerously close to rage. "You can't be serious," he said, his voice low and threatening. "You're going to call off our wedding because of a dog and some made-up stories from a 5-year-old.
"They're not made up," Sarah replied firmly. "Maya doesn't lie, and Rex doesn't make mistakes. I should have listened to both of them sooner."
Maya, who had been quietly clinging to her mother's dress throughout the confrontation, suddenly looked up with relief flooding her small face.
"Does this mean we don't have to live with Marcus anymore, Mommy?"
The innocence of the question broke Sarah's heart and strengthened her resolve simultaneously. "No, baby. We don't have to live with anyone who makes you feel scared or unwelcome." Marcus's composure finally shattered completely. "This is insane. Sarah, we've been planning this wedding for months. We've already moved in together. We've built a life together. You can't just throw it all away because of some paranoid fantasies." But even as he spoke, his body language was confirming everything Rex had been trying to warn them about. His hands were clenched into fists, his breathing was rapid and shallow, and his eyes held a coldness that made several wedding guests shift uncomfortably in their seats. Tom stepped forward, positioning himself protectively near Sarah and Maya. "I think it's time for you to leave, son." "Don't call me son," Marcus snapped. "And I'm not going anywhere. This is my wedding too." Rex, who had been maintaining his protective stance throughout the conversation, suddenly moved again. This time, he positioned himself directly between Marcus and the path to the parking area, effectively cutting off his escape route. The dog's message was clear: "You're not leaving until this is resolved safely." Dr. Harper, who had been observing the entire interaction with professional fascination, spoke up again. "Marcus, I want you to notice something. Rex isn't preventing you from leaving. He's preventing you from approaching Sarah and Maya. There's a significant difference." "I don't care about the difference," Marcus said, his voice rising dangerously. "I want that dog away from me right now." Pastor Williams, who had been conducting weddings for over 30 years and had seen his share of dramatic moments, finally intervened. Perhaps we should all take a step back and consider what's best for everyone involved, especially the child. But Marcus was beyond reason now. The careful facade he had maintained for 8 months was crumbling, and the real man underneath was emerging. What's best for the child is having a father figure who can teach her discipline and respect. What's best for the child is learning that the world doesn't revolve around her every whim and desire. "She's 5 years old," Jenny said, her voice shaking with anger. "What kind of man talks about a 5-year-old like that?" "The kind of man who understands that children need structure," Marcus replied coldly. "The kind of man who doesn't believe in coddling kids until they become spoiled brats who think they can manipulate adults with tears and tantrums." The words revealed more about Marcus's character than hours of conversation could have. Sarah realized with crystal clarity that she had been about to marry a man who saw her daughter not as a child to be loved and protected, but as a problem to be solved through intimidation and control. "Maya is not spoiled or manipulative," Sarah said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "She's a normal 5-year-old who deserves to feel safe and loved in her own home. If you can't understand that, then you have no business being anywhere near her." "Fine," Marcus said, his voice turning ice cold. "If that's how you feel, then maybe you and your precious daughter deserve each other. Maybe you deserve to be alone." The words were meant to hurt, to make Sarah doubt her decision and reconsider, but instead, they had the opposite effect. They confirmed that Marcus saw love and protection as weaknesses rather than strengths. "I'd rather be alone than with someone who would threaten my child," Sarah replied without hesitation. Rex, responding to the increasing hostility in Marcus's voice and body language, took another step forward. The dog's protective instincts were now in full overdrive, and his entire body was coiled like a spring ready to protect his family at any cost. "Get that dog away from me," Marcus demanded, backing up slightly for the first time. "Rex is exactly where he needs to be," Tom said firmly. "He's doing his job." Dr. Harper stood up again, her curiosity overriding the social awkwardness of the situation. "This is actually a perfect example of how trained protection dogs assess threats. Notice how Rex's posture changes in direct response to Marcus's increasing agitation. Indeed, as Marcus became more angry and aggressive, Rex's alertness heightened correspondingly. The dog was reading microsignals that the humans were only beginning to consciously recognize. "I don't need a lecture on dog psychology," Marcus snapped. "I need this situation resolved so we can get on with our lives." "Our lives?" Sarah asked, incredulous. "Marcus, there is no our lives anymore. How can you possibly think we could move forward after everything that's been revealed here today?" "Because kids say things all the time that they don't mean," Marcus replied desperately. "Because dogs react to things they don't understand. Because we love each other, and love should be stronger than fear and paranoia." But his words rang hollow. Love didn't threaten children or make them feel unwelcome. Love didn't dismiss a child's fears or try to silence their voices. Love certainly didn't view a 5-year-old as an obstacle to overcome. Maya, who had been quietly listening to the adult conversation, suddenly spoke up again with the devastating honesty that only children possess. "Marcus, why did you tell me that Mommy would love you more than me after you got married?" The question hit the assembled wedding guests like a physical blow. Several people gasped audibly, and Jenny actually stepped backward in shock. Sarah felt like she had been punched in the stomach. "He said what?" Maya nodded solemnly. "He said that when grown-ups get married, they have to love each other the most, and that little kids come second. He said that's just how families work." The revelation was devastating in its implications. Marcus hadn't just been intimidating Maya, he had been systematically undermining her sense of security and her bond with her mother. "That's not how families work," Sarah said firmly, kneeling down to Maya's level once again. "Mommies always love their children more than anything in the whole world. Getting married doesn't change that. Ever." Marcus watched this interaction with growing frustration. "You're being ridiculous, Sarah. Of course spouses should be each other's priority. That's what marriage means." "Marriage means creating a family where everyone feels loved and valued," Sarah replied, standing up again. "It doesn't mean pushing children aside or making them feel like burdens." Tom, who had been watching his daughter's transformation with pride, finally spoke up again. "Marcus, I think it's time for you to leave. This conversation is over." "No," Marcus said, his voice taking on a dangerous edge. "This conversation is not over. Sarah, You're making the biggest mistake of your life. You'll never find another man willing to take on a woman with a difficult child. You'll end up alone and bitter, and Maya will grow up without a father figure because of your paranoid overprotectiveness." The words were cruel and calculated, designed to hit Sarah's deepest insecurities about being a single mother. But instead of making her doubt herself, they only confirmed that she was making the right choice. "If that's really what you think of Maya and me, then I'm grateful we found out before it was too late," Sarah said calmly. Rex, who had been monitoring the entire conversation, suddenly did something that surprised everyone. Instead of maintaining his protective stance between Marcus and his family, the dog moved to Sarah's side and gently pressed against her leg. It was a gesture of support and comfort rather than aggression. Dr. Harper noticed the change immediately. Interesting, Rex's behavior just shifted from protection mode to comfort mode. He's responding to the emotional resolution rather than the ongoing threat. Marcus looked around at the assembled wedding guests, finally seeming to realize that he had lost any sympathy or support he might have had. Every face showed disgust, disappointment, or outright hostility toward him. "Fine," he said, his voice bitter and defeated. "Have it your way, Sarah. But don't come crying to me when you realize what you've given up." He turned to leave, but as he did, something happened that no one expected. Maya stepped forward, no longer hiding behind her mother's dress. "Marcus," she said in her small but clear voice. He turned back, perhaps hoping for some last-minute reprieve or sign that the 5-year-old might somehow salvage the situation. "I'm not difficult," Maya said with the simple dignity that only children possess. "I'm just little, and little kids deserve to be loved." The words hit Marcus like a slap across the face. For a moment, his angry facade cracked, and something that might have been shame flickered across his features, but it was quickly replaced by defensiveness and bitterness. "Whatever," he muttered, turning away again. As Marcus finally began walking toward the parking area, Rex remained at Sarah's side but kept his eyes trained on the departing figure. The dog's body language gradually relaxed as Marcus moved further away, but he maintained his vigilance until the man was completely out of sight. The wedding guests sat in stunned silence for several minutes after Marcus's car pulled out of the driveway. The romantic countryside setting suddenly felt peaceful again, as if a dark cloud had been lifted from the perfect September afternoon. Pastor Williams was the first to speak. "Sarah, I want you to know that in my 30 years of conducting weddings, I've never been prouder to not perform a ceremony." His words brought a few chuckles from the assembled guests, but they were gentle rather than mocking. Everyone understood that they had just witnessed something serious and potentially life-changing. Jenny approached her sister, her bridesmaid dress rustling softly in the afternoon breeze. "Are you okay?" Sarah looked around at her family and friends, then down at Maya, who was now petting Rex and smiling for the first time all day. "You know what? I think I'm better than okay. I think we just dodged a bullet." Tom put his arm around his daughter's shoulders. "Rex knew," he said quietly. "From the very beginning, he knew something was wrong." Dr. Harper approached the small family group, her professional curiosity still engaged. "Sarah, would you mind if I shared what happened here today in some of my research? Obviously with names changed and details altered for privacy, but this is one of the clearest examples I've ever seen of a protection dog identifying a genuine threat to family safety." Sarah nodded. "If it helps other families recognize warning signs they might miss, then yes, absolutely." Maya looked up at the veterinary behaviorist with interest. "Is Rex a hero?" Dr. Harper smiled warmly. "Yes, sweetheart. Rex is definitely a hero. He protected you and your mommy from someone who might have hurt you." Maya hugged Rex tightly, and the big German shepherd accepted the affection with the gentle patience that had made him such an excellent police dog and family companion. As the shock of the situation began to wear off, some of the wedding guests started approaching Sarah to offer their support and congratulations on making such a difficult but necessary decision. "You were so brave," one of Sarah's college friends said. "I don't know if I would have had the courage to call off a wedding in front of everyone like that." "It wasn't courage," Sarah replied honestly. "It was Rex and Maya who were brave. They tried to tell me the truth, and I almost didn't listen." The afternoon sun was beginning to set over the countryside estate, casting golden light across the unused wedding arch and empty altar. What should have been the beginning of a new chapter in Sarah's life had instead become the end of a dangerous illusion. But as she looked around at her family and friends, and especially at Maya's relieved and happy face, Sarah realized that this ending might actually be a much better beginning than the one she had originally planned. The question now was what secrets about Marcus's past might come to light, and whether Sarah and Maya were truly safe from his anger and potential retaliation. What do you think Marcus is hiding that even his own family doesn't know about? Share your theories in the comments. 3 days after the wedding that never happened, Sarah was still processing everything that had occurred. She sat in her kitchen, watching Maya play with Rex in the backyard through the window. The little girl's laughter filled the air as she threw a tennis ball for the German Shepherd, who retrieved it with the patient dedication that had made him such an excellent working dog. The house felt different now, lighter somehow, despite the chaos of the past few days. Marcus's belongings were gone. He had returned while Sarah and Maya were at her father's house to collect his things, leaving behind only a terse note saying he would be in touch about shared expenses for the canceled wedding. Sarah's phone buzzed constantly with messages from friends and family checking on her, but she had been avoiding most calls. She needed time to think, to process, and to figure out how to explain to Maya why their lives had changed so dramatically. Jenny knocked on the kitchen door before entering, carrying a steaming cup of coffee and a concerned expression. "How are you holding up?" "Better than I expected," Sarah replied honestly. "Maya seems happier than she's been in months. That tells me everything I need to know about the decision I made." Through the window, they watched as Rex gently allowed Maya to examine his ears, his tail wagging slowly. The bond between the child and the dog had grown even stronger since the wedding incident, as if Rex understood that his protective actions had been vindicated. "Dad called this morning," Jenny said, settling into the chair across from Sarah. "He wanted to make sure you were okay. He's pretty proud of you, you know." Sarah smiled. "Rex is the one who deserves the credit. If he hadn't intervened—" She didn't finish the sentence, but both sisters understood the implications. How long would it have taken for Marcus to show his true colors if they had actually gotten married? How much damage might he have done to Maya's sense of security and self-worth? "Speaking of Rex," Jenny said carefully, "Dad thinks you should know something. He's been making some calls to his old contacts in the police department." Sarah looked up sharply. "What kind of calls?" "He asked them to run a background check on Marcus. Not an official one, just informal inquiries. He wanted to see if there was anything in Marcus's past that might explain Rex's reaction." A chill ran down Sarah's spine. "Did they find anything?" Before Jenny could answer, Sarah's phone rang. The caller ID showed her father's number. "Dad?" Sarah answered, putting the phone on the speaker so Jenny could hear. "Sarah, honey, I need you and Jenny to come over to my house right away." Tom's voice was serious in a way that made both women sit up straighter. "Bring Maya. I think she should hear this too, in an age-appropriate way." "What's wrong?" Sarah asked, her heart rate quickening. "Nothing's wrong now," Tom said carefully, "but I've learned some things about Marcus that you need to know. Things that explain everything Rex was trying to tell us." An hour later, Sarah, Maya, and Jenny sat in Tom's living room, while Rex lounged nearby, seeming more relaxed than he had been in months. Tom had prepared some juice and cookies for Maya, who was playing quietly with her coloring books while the adults talked. "I called Detective Rodriguez this morning," Tom began, his expression grave. "He's been with the department for 15 years, and he knows Rex's work record better than anyone. When I told him about what happened at the wedding, he was very interested." Sarah felt her stomach clench. "Why?" "Because Rex has only ever reacted that way to people who pose genuine threats. In his 5 years of service, his threat assessment was never wrong, not once." Jenny leaned forward. "What did the detective find?" Tom took a deep breath. "Marcus Reed has been married twice before. Both marriages ended badly, and both ex-wives filed for restraining orders." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Restraining orders. The first wife, Amanda, filed for divorce after 18 months. In her court documents, she claimed emotional abuse and intimidation. She also mentioned that Marcus had threatened her young son from a previous relationship. Sarah's hands began to shake. Maya, sensing her mother's distress, looked up from her coloring book with concern. "It's okay, baby," Sarah said quickly, forcing a smile. "Mommy's just talking to Grandpa about grown-up things." Maya nodded and returned to her coloring, but Sarah noticed that Rex had moved closer to the little girl, positioning himself within easy reach if she needed comfort. "What about the second wife?" Jenny asked quietly. "That situation was even worse," Tom continued. "Her name is Rebecca, and she filed for divorce and a restraining order after just 8 months of marriage. She had a daughter who was 6 years old at the time. Sarah felt sick. What happened? According to the court documents, Marcus became increasingly controlling and aggressive toward both Rebecca and her daughter. The final incident involved him screaming at the little girl for spilling juice on his laptop. When Rebecca tried to intervene, he grabbed her arm hard enough to leave bruises. The room fell silent except for the sound of Maya's crayon scratching against paper. Sarah stared at her father, trying to process the information. "There's more," Tom said gently. Detective Rodriguez did some additional digging. Marcus has been engaged 4 other times in the past 10 years, always to single mothers with young children. Each engagement ended abruptly, usually with the woman citing concerns about his behavior toward her children. 6 women, Sarah whispered. I was going to be the 7th. It appears that Marcus specifically targets single mothers, Tom explained. The pattern is always the same. He's charming and romantic during the courtship phase, but once he gains access to the family unit, his behavior changes. He becomes controlling, particularly toward the children. Jenny put her hand over her mouth. "Oh my God, Sarah, Rex saved you from a predator?" The word hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Sarah looked over at Maya, who was humming softly while she colored, completely unaware of how close she had come to being trapped in an abusive situation. "How did we not know?" Sarah asked. "How did Marcus hide all of this?" "Predators are experts at hiding their past," Tom explained. "They often use different variations of their names, move frequently, and are very careful about what information they share. Marcus probably thought that in a small town like ours, no one would dig deep enough to find his history." "But Rex knew," Jenny said, looking over at the German Shepherd, who was now lying peacefully next to Maya. "Somehow, Rex knew." "Dogs can sense things we can't," Tom said. "Body language, chemical signals, micro-expressions. Rex's training taught him to identify people with aggressive tendencies and potential for violence. Marcus might have been able to fool us, but he couldn't fool a dog with 5 years of professional threat assessment experience." Sarah stood up abruptly, needing to move to process this information. She walked to the window and looked out at the peaceful neighborhood where she had grown up. Everything looked the same, but she felt like she was seeing the world through completely different eyes. "The worst part," she said quietly, "is that I was falling for it. I actually thought Marcus was wonderful. I thought Maya was just having adjustment issues." "Don't blame yourself," Tom said firmly. "Marcus was a professional manipulator. He had years of practice perfecting his technique." "But Maya tried to tell me," Sarah said, turning back to face her family, "and Rex tried to warn me. I almost ignored both of them because I was so desperate to believe in the fairy tale." Maya looked up from her coloring book again. "Mommy, are you sad?" Sarah knelt down next to her daughter, smoothing her dark curls. "Not sad, baby, just grateful. Grateful that Rex and you were so brave and helped me see the truth." Maya smiled. "Rex is the best dog in the whole world." "Yes, he is," Sarah agreed, reaching over to pet the German Shepherd's head. "He protected us when we needed it most." Tom cleared his throat gently. "There's one more thing you should know, Sarah. Detective Rodriguez thinks you should file a report about what happened. Not criminal charges necessarily, but an official record of Marcus's behavior and threats toward Maya." "Why?" Sarah asked. "Because there will likely be other women after you," Tom explained. "If Marcus continues his pattern of targeting single mothers, having your experience on record could help protect future victims." The thought of other women and children going through what she and Maya had experienced made Sarah feel sick, but it also strengthened her resolve. "You're right," she said. "I'll call Detective Rodriguez tomorrow." Jenny stood up and hugged her sister. "I'm so proud of you, Sarah. It took incredible courage to call off that wedding." "It wasn't courage," Sarah replied. "It was Rex and Maya who had the courage. I just finally listened." As if sensing that he was being discussed, Rex raised his head and looked at Sarah with his intelligent brown eyes. The dog's expression seemed almost knowing, as if he understood the full significance of what had happened. Over the next few days, more information about Marcus's past came to light. Detective Rodriguez contacted Sarah to confirm that they were investigating whether Marcus had committed any crimes that warranted prosecution. While emotional abuse and manipulation were difficult to prosecute, his pattern of behavior toward children was concerning enough to warrant official attention. Sarah also received a phone call from Rebecca, Marcus's second ex-wife, who had somehow learned about the canceled wedding through mutual social media connections. "I had to call you," Rebecca said during their hour-long conversation. "When I heard what happened, I wanted you to know that you made the right choice. Marcus destroyed my daughter's sense of security for years after our marriage ended. She's 14 now and still in therapy." The conversation was difficult but validating. Rebecca described the same pattern of behavior that Sarah had begun to recognize: initial charm, followed by increasing control and intimidation, particularly directed toward children. "The scary thing," Rebecca said, "is how good he is at making you doubt your own instincts. By the end of our marriage, I was questioning my own judgment about everything. It took me years to trust myself again." Sarah understood completely. Even now, knowing everything she knew about Marcus's past, part of her wondered if she had overreacted. The fact that she could still doubt herself after everything that had been revealed showed just how effectively Marcus had manipulated her perceptions. But then she would look at Maya, who had been sleeping better and laughing more in the past week than she had in months, and all doubts disappeared. Children didn't lie about feeling unsafe. Dogs with professional training didn't make mistakes about threat assessment. The truth was clear, even when it was difficult to accept. A week after the canceled wedding, Sarah decided to host a small gathering in her backyard to thank everyone who had supported her through the crisis. It wasn't a celebration exactly, but rather an acknowledgement of how a community had come together to protect one of their own. Tom brought his barbecue grill, Jenny prepared salads and side dishes, and Dr. Harper attended with her husband, bringing along some of her research materials about canine behavioral assessment. Maya ran around the yard with Rex, playing fetch and demonstrating the tricks she had been teaching him. The little girl's joy was infectious, and even the adults found themselves laughing and relaxing as the afternoon wore on. "You know," Dr. Harper said as she watched Maya and Rex play, "this case is going to be significant for my research. It's one of the clearest examples I've documented of a protection dog identifying a threat that humans missed entirely." "What makes it so significant?" Sarah asked. "Several factors," Dr. Harper explained. "First, Rex identified Marcus as a threat from their very first meeting, long before any obvious warning signs appeared. Second, his behavior escalated in direct proportion to the level of threat Marcus posed to the family. And third, his intervention was precisely calibrated. He never showed aggression toward anyone else, only toward Marcus." Pastor Williams, who had also been invited to the gathering, nodded thoughtfully. "In my years of counseling couples, I've learned that children and animals often see things that adults miss. We get so caught up in what we want to see that we ignore what's actually there." As the afternoon turned to evening, Sarah found herself sitting on her back porch with Maya curled up next to her, watching Rex patrol the yard with the satisfied air of a job well done. "Mommy," Maya said sleepily, "are we going to be okay?" "Yes, baby," Sarah replied, stroking her daughter's hair. "We're going to be more than okay. We're going to be sound and happy and free." "And Rex will stay with us forever?" Sarah looked over at her father, who was cleaning the barbecue grill nearby. Tom caught her eye and nodded with a smile. "Yes," Sarah said, "Rex will always be part of our family." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Sarah reflected on how dramatically her life had changed in just 1 week. The fairy tale wedding she had planned was gone, but something much more valuable had taken its place: the knowledge that her daughter was safe, that her family was intact, and that sometimes the most important love stories are about protection rather than romance. Rex settled down next to the porch steps, positioning himself where he could watch both the house and the yard. Even in relaxation, he remained alert and ready to protect his family. The German Shepherd had done more than just interrupt a wedding ceremony. He had saved 2 lives from years of potential abuse and trauma. And in doing so, he had proven that sometimes the most important voices are the ones that speak without words. But Sarah's story wasn't over yet. Marcus's pattern of targeting single mothers meant that he was already looking for his next victim, and Sarah had to decide whether she was brave enough to help stop him before he hurt another family. Would you have the courage to speak out against someone like Marcus, knowing it might make you a target? Let us know what you think in the comments below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more incredible true stories of courage and protection.